Greetings, greetings, greetings. You are now tuned into the vault. Trust Christian own nothing, control everything. Just want to thank you for tuning in live, listening to replay. Always appreciate everybody that tunes in live, listens in the replay. This is the vault, episode 440, 462, state versus private you. This is actually going to be state you versus private you. Definitely wanted to do this episode today because we've gotten inquiries about this for years now, and this is one. Excuse me. This is one of those topics that we just get, people reaching out. Hey, I want to take myself out of the system. I don't want to be a state this or a state that, and how do I even become a state citizen? They don't want to be a federal citizen. We've heard the gambit of questions and quote unquote arguments on this topic for years. This is one of those questions that still to this day will get somebody will reach out and say, hey, I don't want my children in the system. So they'll say, hey, how do I protect my child to not be in the system? And so we're going to talk about this from various different angles today because this comes in various different forms when it comes to questions. Really, the biggest thing is when you're in the public, you could say this is the public you versus the private you. A lot of times, a lot of people say, well, why do I have to, or why does the state you have to pay for a public citation? Well, in the public, they give out citations. In the public, there's a penal system. In the private, they don't give out speeding tickets for running too fast. In the private, they don't give out speeding tickets if it's not a true infraction. Though these infractions are in the public. So this isn't legal advice. This isn't financial advice. We always have to preface the episodes, but we can have these conversations because we're really just going over the questions that we get and answering the questions out in the public that we get in the private and going over it. Because this is one of those questions that comes a lot, which is, hey, I don't want to. They almost say they don't want to have a social. They don't want to have a state them known anymore in the public. Not to say they want to live off the grid, but they're saying, hey, I don't want to be in the public. I don't want to be dealing with the state, things of that nature. Almost saying federal. So what we got to jump into is, well, what if there is a private you and it's never gone anywhere? And so a lot of times, a lot of people reach out and they think that they need to redeem themselves. They got this whole book called the Redemption Manual, or some it's called the Redemption Process. It's one of those things where we could sit here and say right now they'll come on the internet and they'll say, "Hey, I got this UCC. You got to file the UCC, so it's going to be the state you versus the private you. The state you's going to owe the private you a debt. The state you's going to be all caps, and the private you's going to be lowercase, and it's going to owe you a debt. So you're going to be the first lien holder. That's a load of garbage. Oh man, I didn't know that. What difference does it make? Oh, well, the difference is the capital letters. That's what you think the difference is? When a system that they have in place pretty much will automatically change the small case to the uppercase. So it's the same name stating that it owns another name, the same name. That's what people are doing. And we've seen this for years. We were talking to someone actually recently, and they said, "Oh yeah, I'm at the Secretary of State's office doing what? Oh, I'm authenticating this or whatever." It's like, okay, so who owns who? Do you, the private you, own the state you? Oh man, the state me. I should. I'm supposed to own it. I'm the one signing for the financial obligations. Are you not? Are you the fiduciary, the private you? But I'm the trustee, so I'm supposed to be able to, be in control of it. Right. But then are you the beneficiary too of the state you? Do you know if you're the beneficiary of the state you? Well, I don't want to be the beneficiary of the state you. Well, are you the grantor of the state you? But it's trusteeship and I'm supposed to be the trustee, so I'm going to give the judge trusteeship or I'm going to turn over trusteeship to someone else. These are the things that we've heard. Okay. That's what they say. Oh, I'm gonna be in control of the state you. Who's really in control of the state you? The administration that created it, the act that created it. The act that created a public you for the discharging of public debts. Oh, Trust Christian Revolt, I thought you said we can't discharge the debts in the public. And this is what they say in the public is discharging debts. This is what they want to do, discharge a debt. I'ma set off a debt. You think we ain't heard this? We done heard this for 10 years. Discharge a debt. It's laughable. Cause that's the state you. That's not the private you. Private you doesn't own anything. Private you, Trust Christian, know not to control everything. Doesn't want to own anything. The state you though. People want to. The questions that we've gotten throughout the years are, oh, I'm trying to protect something. You're trying to protect the state you from having charges filed against it for it not to. Oh, I don't want the copyright to be using of the state you because the state you is my trademark. It's my trademark in the public. It's my copyright in the public. Right? Isn't this the argument? My state you is being used in the public, and I don't want it to be used in the public. This is what they say. I don't want my state you to be used in the public. Okay, you don't want your state you to be used in the public, but it is a public domain name. It's not that, oh, it has to be a discharging entity. A lot of times, a lot of people might say that. Well, it's not that it's just that. There's many people that are, you think about it, they actually utilize it as a number to, if there is going to be a charging mechanism, then they have that in place. They have it in place for people. State you versus private you. So there is a contrast versus the state you and the private you. Oh man, well, Trust Christian Revolt, the private you, I'm signing for the public you, I'm signing for the state you, and I don't want to do that anymore. This is what they say. I don't want to do that anymore. They want to stop. Well, when you go into the private, that means you hold assets. This is the reality of the situation, ladies and gentlemen, because we understand that in the private sector, it's alive and well, doing well. But a lot of times, a lot of people say, "Oh, well, the state me, it has to deal with these encumbrances. It has to deal with these debt obligations and things of that nature." In the private, it hasn't been easy for me to accumulate debt. Correct, because the private requires true. We were talking to someone the other day about this term called quid pro quo, something for something. That's what we talked to them about. So in the private, there is equal value of exchange in the private because the parties usually have to agree. Whereas the state, usually you see a lot of bilateral contracts or where you see or contracts that aren't necessarily adhesion contracts where you don't even see that they're necessarily in favor of one particular party and they kind of put another party in a very torturous position because they can't get around it sometimes. And you hear many different things, of how things are administered, if something goes wrong. So back to the state you, the thing that people have reached out for years. The reason why we're talking about it today is because so many people have reached out for it for years. Oh man, Trust Christian involved. I want to make sure my family's not in the state position no more. I know that the state, man, I don't want to be under the state's control. Yeah, you're right. You may not be under the state's control, but at the same time, are you in a position where you're aware of your private self, or do you have your private self in place, just like you have the public self in place? These are things, are conversations that we have because, we get on the phone with the clients, and then their lawyers will come on the line and they'll talk about their public. They'll talk about the state use. What about the state you paying state taxes, and what about the state you paying federal taxes and things of that nature? That's what they talk about. That's what these public lawyers and accountants that come on the line with the clients, and they'll say, "Oh well, the private you, which is you're asking in that capacity, trust Christian, own nothing, control everything." You'll say, "Well, how come they're saying this and I'm saying and I'm asking and you're saying that?" Well, remember, they're focused on the state you. They're not focused on the private you. Why would a state bar lawyer be focused on the private you? You have to go to those type of people. The vault provides that. But once again, we'll say that. Why would a public barred attorney talk about private you? Why would they give you any private you encouragement? Why would they give you any private words of wisdom? But these are the things that people don't understand because sometimes because they're in the public and that's fair, public and private don't mix. So hey, I'm in the public, but then a lot of people say, hey, I'm trying to get out of the public. Well, how do you separate that? Well, you separate that by knowing that hey, there's a state you and a private you. Those are two different people. When people come at us talking about it, like we say, oh, I'm gonna separate myself from the state, and I'm gonna separate myself from this, and that's that and the third. They say that, okay, but you're aware that when you're in the public, most people are talking about the state you. When you come to the vault or when you come to such settings, we are talking about the private you. The private you, in turn, is a position that most people in the state are not talking about. Why would they? They're in the public. So when you come into the environment of, oh, I want to talk about the private you, you have to specifically engage in private you conversation. What is the focus of private you and private in conversation? What is that focus? What does that look like? We knows what it look like. we know what it looks like. It is a clear separation of when you're talking to your public attorneys and your public accountants, certified public accountant, the this is what these people are going to talk to you all about. They're going to talk to you about state you, and the way you separate that is by coming to them in a capacity where not just, oh, you're making it very clear that you're talking about the private you, but you definitely have to put them on notice. Hey, we're talking about the private you. We're talking about private me. We're not talking about, in the state capacity, because of course they're going to talk to you from that capacity. And this is one of the hurdles that our trustees and people that we work with get over or have to get over is, hey, I have to talk to this person now, and I have to let them know that I'm not talking to them in a public capacity. I'm talking to them in a private capacity. It's almost like saying off the record. It's like saying, okay, you're not legally held for this advice now. So, but at the same time, you want to get around lawyers and accountants that when you're talking to them, you say, hey, is this, it's not that you want the legal advice, but why not have them, give you legal advice and say, hey, does this work in the private as well as in the public? See, the difference is lawyers actually are very aware of what the private sector looks like. They have to be. The law comes from the private sector. It's not all just legislative, and they're very familiar with where it stems from. So when you talk to them in certain capacities, they're still able to say, hey, is this legal or not legal? And that's the best part about talking to lawyers is you get to find out, is this legal in the public or in the private sense, and they can answer that question. But actually making it a point to ask them those questions is a very, very important thing. Hey, what is this public capacity? What is this private capacity? Because a lot of times what you'll hear the lawyers say is, oh, well, public capacity is public office. And that's not necessarily true. What public capacity is anytime the public you, the state use in the public and can be charged with a public charge. That's the public you. That's the public you that they are either not are conflating or not saying directly, which is the state you is the public you. That can be charged. The private you, there's other ways to move in that capacity, period. But when it comes to the state you is definitely the public you. And these are things that when people say, oh man, am I going to have an issue or how do I figure it out? A lot of people say, oh man, I want to go private. I want to be private. I don't want to be in the public. Well, if you don't want to be in the public, that means yes, you're going to stop having state you type operations. Why not? That means public U operations. That means now you're crossing over into a sector that specifically says trust Christian, know nothing, control everything. Why? Because the state you owns assets. This is the public education that you've been given. The public education people been given, which is own houses, own cars, own this, own that. Have everything in your state you name. So you can go through, put it in a will and put it in a trust and put it in a this and put it in a that. This is the type of conversation that goes on in the public. There's a whole lot of different ways to administer assets in the public. It's not one way, it's a bunch of ways. Just like it is in the private. But specifically, let's talk about that public stuff. Oh, well, in the public, there's many ways to do it. There's no one way to skin a cat. Oh, you got to have a certain amount of money in the state, in the state side. Right. In the private side, you could find out many different things before there's some public regulatory number that says that you can and can't have it. That's why people are so excited about the crypto stuff, because that was supposedly private, but they don't say it's private. They just come out and say it's illicit. Oh, it's not regulated. That means it's not state. But then somehow people are tying their state to the so-called private ownership of assets. So-called, oh, well, we can own them privately. How you own them privately? They got KYCs and they got your public state U name on there. These are the conversations that we could have. That's the point. There's a difference. Feel free to reach out, Christian at trustchristian.com. Once again, that's Christian at trustchristian.com. Maybe you need a consultation. Maybe you need to go private, as they say. Oh, we're going private. Maybe it's just a consultation. Because there is a difference between the state U and the private U. And, we hear this across the board. Across the board. Oh, well, I'm trying to get myself out of the public. Even if you owned a company, we talked about this in the past few episodes. People talk about, oh, well, you could own a company in another state. Right, that's what they say. Oh, you don't have to name the owner. And then we address small things that we know owners run into all the time, or people that operate from those states, what they run into all the time. Even if you have a registered agent, which a lot of states require registered agents nowadays for companies, a lot of states do. Not all of them, but not, a lot of them do. So even if you go into a state where you have a registered agent, they can't speak for you. That's just a person who received mail for a lawsuit. But oh, the person over the internet didn't tell you that, did they? Because they're state you, state public people. So when we talked about the private, yes, it's Christian at trustchristian.com. Feel free to reach out. Christian at trustchristian.com. Once again, that's the email, Christian at trustchristian.com. Look forward to hearing from you. But we definitely want to talk about this today. And we know quite a few people that wanted to hear about this subject matter because they're going through it right now. They're figuring out, hey, is it we've had people reach out to us for years and years and years and say, man, I'm going through this process. I'm going to start this process. I'm 3, 4, 500, 600 $600 deep. I'm $1,000 deep, and I need this system. I need this process to pay for itself. Or is it even worth doing? Well, if it was worth doing, what are you going to get out of the process of the private you owning the state you? Oh, well, I'm the lien holder. I'm the first lien holder on it. Okay, well, who's really putting a lien on you? How's that going to affect your credit score? By you even putting a lien on you, do you even know how that's going to affect your credit score? The public you or the private you? Do you know how that's going to affect you? But the gurus don't tell you that if you put a lien on yourself, that it might show up in public record because you're still putting a lien on the public you. So anytime public institutions are doing public searches on the public you, they can see that you have a lien on you privately. You think they don't see that? Oh man, I thought I was gonna get over on the system. I thought I was gonna put a lien on my birth certificate. I thought I was gonna put a lien on something. Okay.